First topic was inequality. I think it was inequality among states, but the inequality starts with inequality among people. And obviously, one of the central objectives that we have is to make sure that we are able to reduce the levels of inequality among people, and especially not to leave anyone behind in relation to the prospects of development that we are witnessing in the world today. But there is a second level of inequality which you raise, which is inequality among states. And in the end, that inequality is real. I mean, both among people and about states, we usually say that everybody is equal, but some are more equal than the others. That is the fact also in the United Nations. We have 5 countries that have a veto power in the Security Council. No? That is a basic inequality. And indeed, what we see in international relations today, I come from a small country, no? A small country that is member of the European Union and member of the United Nations. And let's be clear, small countries have much less influence than big countries. Look at climate change. We had more than 70 countries that committed to carbon neutrality in 2050 in our summit. They represent 15% of the emissions. All those big emitters in the world have not yet committed to do the same, because they feel they are more equal than the others. And we really need to make sure that equality among people, which is not only equality of income, it's equality of opportunities, is the fact that in many societies, the children of those that were in the best universities are those that go on being in the best universities. And the children of those that were not in the university or were in the bad universities are the ones that still go to the bad universities. I mean, we need equality among people, but we need also equality among states. It will not be easy to reach. I have to say that we have been trying to reform the Security Council since many, many decades ago, and things are not moving. Because one of the things I've learned in my life is that power usually is not given. Power needs to be taken. And that is not always possible. Now, the second question about human rights. You are absolutely right. We had a fantastic progress of human rights. Human rights are not only political rights. Human rights are political, civil, but also economic and social rights. You were talking about hunger. To eliminate hunger is to promote human rights. To eliminate extreme poverty is to promote human rights. So you need to have an understanding that all rights are important. The right to speak, the right to freedom of association, political rights, but also the right to have health, to have education. So all those rights need to be seen together. And the truth is that we are seeing in relation to some of the civil and political rights a pushback. The civic space has been shrinking in many countries of the world. The capacity of the civil society to participate has been shrinking. We see more journalists in jail. We see more human rights defenders in jail. And so it's very important to have a pushback on the pushback, and to have a strong commitment, and young people can play a very important role in order for the full respect of human rights, both political and civil and economic rights. And of course, this is true everywhere, and is true particularly in the situations we have more dramatic violations of human rights. And I've been saying very clearly in relation to, I spoke on many issues about Kashmir during this visit, but one of the things I've said, it is absolutely essential to have human rights and fundamental freedoms for the people to have their lives and their dignity. In relation to the new technologies and the fourth industrial revolution, the way we are used to deal with questions that new questions in the world is through international law. Usually we decide to have a convention to define the set of rules. That convention requires a dialogue among all member states. Then finally there is an agreement reached at the level of the General Assembly, and then the convention is drafted, and after being drafted we start to have countries acceding to the convention. Then governments decide so, then it has to be ratified by parliaments, and it can take 5 years, 6 years, 7 years to create a new set of rules in relation to a certain number of areas in the life of our problems. Now, this is a completely inadequate method to deal with new technologies. Because the day we establish a norm for something, that something no longer exists, and it has changed dramatically, because the evolution in the digital economy and the digital society is at a huge speed. So what we created an high-level panel on digital cooperation. We gathered some of the most important companies, several governments that are very, I would say, forward-looking in this dimension, researchers, people of the civil society, lawyers. We brought them together and they came with a number of suggestions and a number of conclusions to recommend to the United Nations and to the international community as a whole. And the main principle is what we need is not formal, rigid forms of international law, except in some areas. For instance, when I mentioned I'd like to see a ban on autonomous weapons. What we need is much more flexible mechanisms in which a multi-stakeholder approach is used, in which we bring together governments, companies, researchers, civil society, and to try to establish a minimum consensus on some best practices, some red lines that should not be crossed, some forms of cooperation and of management, some forms of soft regulation, allowing for this system to permanently be adopting the norms that enable it to be globally a force for good. It is less effective than rigid international law, but it is the only thing that is possible with the speed with which everything is evolving. And we are seeing, very interesting, we are seeing something that 10 years ago would be completely impossible. If you would go and talk to any of those companies that are relevant in the world of technology 10 years ago, and if you ask them for regulation, they would say, oh, regulation would kill us. What we need is freedom. What we are is bringing people together. We are a fantastic force for good. Don't regulate. Don't touch us. And now you have seen Microsoft asking, we need regulation. You have seen Google saying artificial intelligence needs to be regulated. And you even saw Zuckerberg saying, I believe that in relation to these questions of hate speech, etc., we need regulation because we cannot decide by ourselves. Which means that the companies are understanding that some order needs to be put in this, and this creates a huge opportunity for an effective cooperation among all actors. The second question that was raised was, sorry, I can't read what I write. Sorry?
It was...
No, that was the first.
Yeah.
Exploitation. Now, the way international systems are today defined are ways in which multinational corporations benefit in all areas. First, they can put their activities where they are cheaper, where salaries are lower and rights of workers are lower. They can move their income in a way that they pay taxes in the countries where taxes are lower, and some of them do not pay any taxes. And so the system has been organized in a way that because of the inability to have global rules and the fact that countries are competing with each other, that creates a situation in which global multinational corporations take the best of everything. What we need on this, and this is one of the conditions of globalization, is a fair globalization, which means that we need to put countries together in establishing a certain number of rules in order for these forms of exploitation not to be possible. One good example, the OECD has just announced that they are going to propose a new system of norms for global taxation that would increase quite dramatically the income of governments, exactly by avoiding these mechanisms of shifting profits from one country to another to allow for taxes not to be paid. This is something that is absolutely basic. But the other aspect is related to the rights of the workers. One of the things we have been working hard in the International Labour Organization is the so-called decent work norms, to have norms all over the world in which a number of basic rights are respected. And governments have a key role to play here. Governments need to be able to establish the rules that allow for the rights of the workers to be fully respected by multinational corporations.